Hello, everyone. On behalf of Dr. Pedagogical, I want to welcome everyone to this session of the LAFRAC Triennial Holocaust Education Conference. And before we begin tonight, I want to read the land acknowledgement, which has been developed and adopted by Seton Hill University. Seton Hill University rests upon the ancestral lands of many First Nations people, including the Seneca, Lenni Lenape, and Shawnee, as well as others who made their homes in the forests of southwestern Pennsylvania prior to the arrival of European settlers. These people who lost the right to name themselves include the Adena, Hopewell, and Monongahela. We acknowledge the centuries of colonialism and genocide that led to the forced removal of indigenous people in our region and the resultant loss of historical information, which makes a complete land acknowledgement impossible. We recognize with gratitude the indigenous peoples of the past, present, and future who call this area home, and we honor their lands. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce tonight's speaker. I changed the slide on you, Tim. I'm sorry. That was an accident. I met Timothy in 2019 when we both attended the same conference. We both presented at the same conference in Montenegro, which is a small country in the Balkans. And hours before the panel took place, I was tasked with chairing the panel. So I had to very quickly introduce, I knew the other person who was presenting, but I had to quickly introduce myself to Timothy, and we had a chance to talk very quickly. But I can tell you that the presentation he made at that time really was just extraordinary. And it was only a few hours later when we chanced upon one another on the Corso, the main walking area of the city of Cetinje, and we sat down and we're having a drink and talking, that we already conceived of the idea that Timothy and I would collaborate, that he would make himself available to Seton Hill and to make him to become in whatever way, as a resource person, as somebody who could come and give a talk, as a visiting scholar. Because it was clear immediately that Timothy's background, his experience, his teaching, all would provide a way for Seton Hill University students to expand their experience and to really, as the French say, have a change of views, have a change of ideas about the world. Well, that was 2019, and you all know what happened in 2020. So some of our plans, we could say, went off the rails, but nevertheless, Timothy made himself available, for instance, for Keisha Jimerson when she was doing a program on with our students on the naming of sports teams, Native American naming of sports teams, and also to Dr. Wierszewski, who's here tonight, and I just want to read what she said when I wrote to her about this. And I'm quoting here: "He was so helpful to me in my planning for EL 268 New Voices when I taught it with a focus on Indigenous voices. He gave me ideas about texts and potential assignments during the summer as I was planning. He also did a guest lecture early in the class about contemporary Indigenous writers and perspectives via Zoom, and that my students really loved. he participated in a narrative 4 story exchange with my students later in the semester. This is someone who is not receiving a Seton Hill salary, but already has made himself a collaborator and really a colleague to us. We finally did bring him to campus in 2022 when we had the NEH-funded institute here on grappling with genocide. And we had planned for a day when Timothy would present and lead a discussion and help students with an understanding of the book by the Indigenous author and botanist Braiding Sweetgrass. And he readily agreed to come, and he also said to me, and if you want, I'll come for the whole week to make myself available for the Institute participants. The whole week. And he did so, and was an extraordinary resource for the participants at that time. So here we are, finally in 2024. Timothy is here to give a presentation. He's here as a visiting scholar, and we'll be working with students in classes in the day following our conference. So I'm very pleased to be able to present Timothy Petete to you. He is a member of the Oklahoma Seminole Nation, and born and raised in Oklahoma. He has studied in California at the University of California, and received his Ph.D. from the University of Oklahoma in American and Native American literature. For many years, he taught at the University of Central Oklahoma, and recently has moved on to the University of California at the Riverside campus, the good one. His talk tonight is on narrative pedagogies, and I'm just going to turn it over to him at this point. So.
Can you hear me okay? Several years of Zoom conversations, I usually open with that. Can you hear me? Hinche, Timothy Petete, no Chifkiros, Seminole Kiowis, Nagosa Kiowis, Hidrogis. Mado. My name is Timothy Petete. I'm a member of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma. I'm a member of the Nagosi Bear Clan, and my ancestral grounds are the Hitchiti grounds. Thank you. It's nice to be back here again. I like to think of this moment to my relatives, my parents, but in particular my grandparents, because they would be so happy for me to be participating in an event, in a space, at an institution that values faith and community. And I think when you see that intertwine in that commitment to bringing people together through good times and tough ones, it's important. I'd like to thank the president, the LeFrak family, for creating this event for us and helping us share with one another. The administrators, and in particular Jim, who has been a very kind and helpful colleague for more than 2 years. Several faculty and staff, including my great friend John, Emily, Deb, Christine, and to others who I've recently met or worked with over the last 2 years and this week. I'd also like to thank the faculty and staff for helping us convene and work together this week and help everything come together. The students, both who have attended the sessions, as well as those who are participating online and involved in the program. In addition, the participants who started with our keynote on Sunday, and then yesterday and in today, and talking about all the different ways in which narratives matter and how they help, and how different narratives really help us come together and maintain a belief in the power of empathy and camaraderie and fellowship. And so to you, you've helped me, I think, transition to my moment of speaking because of what the groundwork and labor that you've put forth. And for that, I also say Mado. My talk tonight will discuss notions of pedagogical sovereignties. And I stretch back about 20 years in terms of this notion of attaching subject areas to the concept of sovereignty. And it goes back to Scott Richard Lyne's rhetorical sovereignty and focusing on rhetoric and communication. And that's taken several different forms, and other scholars and practitioners have shaped this notion of sovereignty to include visual sovereignty, sonic sovereignty, creative sovereignty. And with regard to pedagogical sovereignties, it's also referred to in some instances as educational sovereignties. And I pick up the torch from Dr. Megan Bang, a professor at Northwestern University. And really the kind of, I'd say, loose definition of this term is the idea that education systems and practitioners should try to align with cultural practices and values of the communities they serve. As someone who's been in education for several years, I try to lend myself to this model in what I do in classrooms and throughout my community. And tonight, I'd like to focus on ways in which we can teach Indigenous narratives in responsible and meaningful ways. And I hope this talk contributes to your learning experience. As I proceed, I'd also like to thank the artists who have granted me permission and license to use their work to help complement my words. This decade represents another watershed moment in American Indian or Indigenous or Native American literatures. I use these terms interchangeably. At a brief moment in time, just a few years ago, the U.S. Poet Laureate was Joy Harjo. The Pulitzer Prize recipient for poetry was Natalie Diaz. And the Pulitzer Prize recipient for fiction was Louise Erdrich. 3 Indigenous women holding these esteemed honors at the same time. And I think that helped us reach a nexus where also, while we were navigating a pandemic, it provided us access to materials, text, film, resources, guides, other types of materials that we'd never had, that we could not access as teachers prior to that. And I think it's helped us indigenize spaces and classes in ways we hadn't before, meaning whether we're talking about the social sciences or STEM or language arts. It's given more people, I think, empowerment and I'd say support to teach Indigenous narratives in their classrooms. Now, of course, with regard to what I would term youth literature, we can look back to about 24 years ago. And in this moment, I'll discuss board books, or what we call picture books as well, to the year 2000 with the publication of Cynthia Lydig Smith's Jingle Dancer. It differed from board books that discuss Native people. For our tiniest children to be read to look, to turn pages, it depicted a young woman living in the 20th century. And it featured characters that came from urban spaces, that, who had relatives who were professionals. And it was this sense of family and community guiding them in this current milieu. And I think that really set the stage in education for what would come next in terms of pedagogy as well as literary production. We saw over the course of the next 20 years, multilingual books, board books, where children from their own communities, but other children of all races and creeds, could learn language in their early childhood years. So We All Count, and multiple uses of that. We have books such as C is for Chickasaw, and others that allow us to share this information, but not just give exposure, but investment in community and Native and Indigenous narratives to all children. Within the last few years, we've seen other books, such as Carol Lindstrom's and Michaela Goad's We Are Water Protectors, which takes that commitment to justice and environmental stewardship a step further. Again, allowing young children to see the notions of investment and responsibility in an early age. And we also have Tracy Sorrell's We Are Still Here, which combined with We Are Grateful, another one of their works, focuses on contemporary Indigenous realities. And I think that helps us humanize and normalize ourselves with other communities. If we extend that to middle and young adult literature, we see the same turn and same aspects of development. We have We Still Belong, Apple in the Middle, and Indigenous. And these share with us the circumstances and realities of young Native people who are just like their peers. Whether it's trying to navigate the importance of one's home community in an urban setting, or having a multiracial background, or having interests beyond what one might perceive as only cultural, right, values and cultural values and I'd say attachments. And of course, 2 years ago, we read as one of our anchor texts, Braiding Sweetgrass. And in terms of that memoir, it's really good to see that that has been adapted by Monique Grace Smith for young adults, so they can have access to these particular ideas and experiences as well. And what I like about these contexts and these works, and these are just a few of the ones that are out there, I mean, is that they're accessible to so many young people in urban spaces, in tribal spaces, in suburban spaces, and in rural spaces. They extend beyond their own, I'd say, targeted community. And so now, whether it's for our picture books or it is for young adults, we've seen this really intentional effort of Native writers to put themselves forth in terms of writing according to their interests, their talent, and then also their stories. And we see that in genre fiction, we see that in young adult romance novels, we see it in historical works, we also see it in memoir, in community-based works, and as well as what we would refer to as literary fiction. But on the subject of memoir, we have within, for more than a generation, had several limitations. For instance, with respect to subjects and persons, a lot of the books would only focus on or highlight major events or prominent figures. So didn't give us access to normal people, right? Or just regular people. They were either astronauts or politicians or the first of their community to do something, right? So isolating them in ways and holding them up, but not giving us an everyday experience. In terms of the era that was portrayed, it would typically be a 19th century person or an early 20th century person for memoir, and yet that has changed. And I think also the limitations in some ways in memoir for young adult and middle readers was region and culture. So only having limited to maybe Plains memoirs, or only having limited access to, or the production of Southwest, right? And so if we're living in Pennsylvania or we're living in Oklahoma, it only goes so far for us. It only helps our students see themselves or understand their neighbors or their relatives to a certain extent. And I think it's changing, and for the better. And so I'm going to talk to you tonight about one particular work, a recent, published in 2023, This Indian Kid by Eddie Chukalate. And Eddie is what I would call a friendly acquaintance. A lot like Emily and I. We've communicated a lot over 15 years, but only over the phone and only over email, but I would call him a friendly acquaintance. He is Muskogee Creek and Cherokee. He was born and raised in Muskogee. He has a background in journalism and creative writing. He obtained his undergraduate degree at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He also was awarded a Stegner Fellowship at Stanford University, a two-year fellowship, which helped lead him to the master's program at the Writers' Workshop at the University of Iowa. Yet, it wasn't a straight trajectory for Eddie. A majority of his professional life, his adult life, has been working as a journalist. So what we see, both in his experience and his work, is a blended reality, not about being native and non-native, but being a journalist and then trying to adjust to being a creative writer. He published a lot of short stories, even helped as a contributing editor while at IAIA to help produce their student journals. Some of his short stories, some of the anecdotes provided in This Indian Kid, the incidents were previously published in places such as Kenyon Review, Plowshares, and one of his stories received an O. Henry Prize, and that was a book that kind of catapulted him forward. He was able to, in 2010, publish his first book, Cheyenne Madonna, which is a kind of a fictionalized version of his life, but also short stories, interconnected short stories. And Cheyenne Madonna begins to see itself in This Indian Kid. So if you imagine the stories and things that he's written before, now he's adjusting, right? He's writing for middle school students, so 7th grade and above, 12 and above. This work is also, I'd say, accessible and relevant to secondary audiences. What stands out is the style of writing of the memoir he conveys. It is distinctly Oklahoma. It is distinctly rural. I like to say that Eddie writes in his natural voice. And for some people, that may say rough or unpolished, but I think it really I think speaks to kids, in that no, everything's not crafted and put together. That's really kind of talking to them instead of really speaking with them. But when I teach Indigenous text, I'm always aware of the approaches that I take and the sovereignty, the power, and the responsibility that I have. So a majority of my career, I worked in an institution. A majority of my students were pre-service English teachers, and they're also early childhood ed and special education and other areas of education. And so I needed to adjust my pedagogy and really look at the approaches I was taking to assigning text and also navigating works with students. So for me and for us as teachers, it really depends on our context, right? What class are we in? What level? What are our outcomes? You know, when we think about teaching literature, sometimes we pick something, and I'm including myself in the plural we, not assigning it to anyone else, but it's something we want our students to read. But we don't know the implications of that. And I think, Kim, you talked about that earlier, about introducing these works. And for me, it's the context, right? And I always think, you know, where am I teaching at? I'm teaching at a metropolitan institution. And I need to be able to utilize works that help these students take the next step. I also look at audiences. These pre-service teachers, they model what we do in classrooms. Whether it's the works we assign, the activities we create, I need to make sure that these types of works, these types of activities are things that they can take with them. And I also have to be aware of my intentions. Why am I assigning this particular work? Why do I think this will be helpful to students? And then I also have to be aware of my practices. How much I assign, when I assign it, right? What types of, I'd say, open-ended and closed questions do I ask during our discussions? How much do I remove my voice from those discussions and allow them to create meaning? And it's really, you know, I think it's really interesting when you grant students a little bit more of that agency in the class, right? Because through simple, you know, but also intentional activities, you see that there's more to it when they're annotating, that they're doing more than what you could generate by asking a direct question. And they are exchanging, and they're developing not only their skill set, but their own narratives. And it speaks to the promise of narratives, and it allows us to connect with one another. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some areas of the text that I think might be useful. So we notice here's Eddie with his friend Darren. This image appears at the end, towards the end of the book. He's at his oldest point in the memoir. He's 19. And on the surface, you know, you may say it resembles our students today, but if you take a deeper look, the students can tell that it's not from 2020, right? And there's subtle things they can see. And then you get a chance for them to start talking about things, because when they think of history, they think of it so long ago. But we know we live in a very accelerated world. And so the questions and the annotations and the topics that come up are things like, wow, you had to turn the channel, you know, and you had to sit there. And when something came on, it was like the only time it was on. There was no recording, right? There was no DVR. There was no cable. Also, going to the store on a weekend and grabbing the paper. You know, it takes them to a time when they're doing that, you know, and why it was important to read a newspaper. Spending an entire day at the library and being dropped off. And I think that begins to show them, you know, a sense of who they are, but also who people in their community are. As well as being able to go for walks and spend time with yourself and spend time outdoors. And those are some of the hallmarks of the narrative that really kind of come through for my students. Also, in terms of looking at this as a young adult memoir, is it calls the attention to integration, that natives do not live in isolated communities. And in particular in Oklahoma, there are 39 federally recognized nations, and yet they are integrated into their communities. And so we have here a Little League baseball team. And Eddie is right here, along with his really good friend. But speaking to the power of experience, of being integrated and growing up with, I'd say, a contemporary experience. And drawing on these things are being raised in a Baptist church, when we don't typically think of like this integrated experience and having multiple faiths within a Native American community. Learning language, learning norms, learning history, learning social skills, learning responsibility in a community. Being in an integrated classroom, not just by race, but by class, learning, it's a learning experience, and the power behind that to make friends and form one's identity. In this memoir, it also refers to or brings out the eclectic music of Oklahoma and people with AM radio and FM radio. And so the programs that come out, and also, again, the media that and how that's changed. So there's references to radio and radio going off at night. You know, there's radio, there are cassette tapes, albums, bluegrass, southern, gospel, rock and roll, different types of music in the narrative. And sports, and this isn't a quintessential sports narrative, but I think sports is one of the things in this community that brings all people together. And in fact, it's Eddie's participation in baseball as a high schooler, which leads him to his vocation. He was on the baseball team, and he was the last person on the roster, which meant he had to take the coach's journalism class. And the coach taught them how to write a lead. And this led Eddie to like doing better in school. It led him to getting a job in journalism as a high school student, and then also, as I say, shaped his experience so much that now he's one of the main copy editors at the Minneapolis Tribune. I'd also like to call attention to his family and his experience growing up in Oklahoma. And it's much like communities that are non-native and not just set in Oklahoma, but learning more about our relations and the types of food that we meet, and knowing that what nourishment comes from more than just those material items. It's the fellowship, it's the preparation, it's the gratitude, it's the company that you share with your family and relatives. Laughter, being able to share with your relatives and your friends and your neighbors a sense of joy over meals and companionship. Also, the students know about those green stamps, and they're asking me about those today, and I said, well, if you just look at your phone, you've got those reward apps on there, so every time you go to Chipotle, things like that. But I said, back in the day, this is how you did it. But they understood the patience, and why it takes time to, you get things, that delayed gratitude that one gets when we get a toy or an item based on that. And the comforts of home, and if we gain a sense of maybe our house felt so much bigger when we were growing up than it really is, and all the intricacies of that house, from the furniture to the doors to the scratches and scuffs, but to the comforts of knowing that was your home. There's also some very tough moments in this text. And this is a picture of Eddie's best friend, Lonnie, a childhood friend, and they're still friends today. And it talks about things that we've mentioned before, what happens when you're not in a position to speak up when something happens. And for Eddie, growing up with friends of several backgrounds, he didn't expect to encounter hostility, his friend to encounter hostility when he was with him, and especially from one of his relatives. And it was very jarring for Eddie to see a relative speak to one of his friends in an abusive manner. And it's taken Eddie a majority of his life to reconcile that. He's maintained friendship, but he didn't know how to really process that as an adult or ensure himself that he was not able to do something in that moment. But he's now in a position to do something and to speak out and to recall that, and he does so in his writing. So in closing, I think these narratives, and this one in particular, speaks to contemporary Indigenous realities. It also allows us to think about these different spaces in which we refer to as indigenized space. Being in an integrated society, we wrestle and grapple with the same issues that other Americans do as well. And yet it's through narratives that we open the door to possibilities of healing and cooperation. And with that, I say, Mado. Yes, please.
Got to run all the way up here. This is not necessarily a question, but I just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done. I think that everything that I heard you talk about at the NEH Institute and just beyond your session, you taking the time to sit with us, talk with us, I think just really exemplified how important you think narrative is and how life-changing it can really be to sit and share stories and examples. And so I just want to thank you for that. And I truly think that my unit on Indigenous genocide in North America would not be the same if you had not shared those resources with me. And I think that students really get a full, at least I hope, look and a local look at things that happened in Nebraska and what urban and modern Native identities look like today. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Now, Kim and I met virtually about a year ago, a little over a year ago, when they were working on a unit. And there's a really good, I'd say, graphic novel called Shilako. It's like an Indian boarding school story. I may have gotten the subtitle wrong, but it's fantastic. It's authored by Julie Pearson Little Thunder, and it's illustrated by Johnny Dicon. These are two Muskogee citizens. And it talks about the boarding school experience through the eyes of a child coming back and hearing stories. And we often think of only the trouble and only the pain of boarding schools. And this helps convey some of the communities and bonds, friendships, and I'd say notions of empowerment and resilience that occurred in those communities as well. It's a really good text. You can download it for free and accessible, but I really the people working on that are terrific human beings, and it's a good text to use. Any other thoughts or questions or comments?
Timothy, you mentioned that in Oklahoma, indigenous people aren't, by and large, living on reservations. And there was an image that you showed at the American Corner in Cetinje of children lined up getting ready to run a race. And you're not remembering the...
I'm trying to, sorry.
And you were making the point, in Oklahoma, Indigenous people aren't living on reservations by and large. They're going to school with everybody else. And I wish we had the image, but if you could talk about it for just 1 minute, I think it would help crystallize the importance of that reality of Native peoples in Oklahoma.
Oh yeah, so I remember what you're referring to, and so you know, I'm old enough to know that it was not as tough as my parents or grandparents, certainly by no stretch of imagination, but there's still work to do, and I think doing that constructively and productively can make a difference. And John's referring to an event that happens every spring. Oklahoma, again, celebrates the land run when tribal citizens, tribal communities were kind of dissolved, their land rights were dissolved, and that was opened up for people coming west, and they reenact that. So elementary grade children reenact that, and growing up, you don't have the life experience or the critical skills to think about what you're doing, but in recent years, people have been more intentional and aware of like how that can be problematic, and so celebrating certain things are obviously, I mean, statehood is a good thing. Just the ways in which we do those, they have implications. In the same way we assign certain stories, or we introduce things to students. Regardless of their age, they can be an adult student in a class, and maybe there's something I share without like the subject notification, but even if I do, I'm not sure of their lived experience, and I have to be aware of that. But yeah, so the pageantry of that can be harmful.
Tim, thanks so much for being with us this week, and just for all of your incredible contributions. And I have a question related to your experience as someone who I know just moved away from Oklahoma to California. So you're in this new pedagogical context, and also I know that you travel regularly with students internationally. And so I wondered if you might, and I am passionate about travel with students as well, as you know, but I'm just wondering if you might share with us how this experience for you of kind of shifting your own geography to a new place has maybe impacted your teaching, or how you think about the Native American communities from where you come. And then also when you travel with students, how those conversations and perspectives from the international context help them to think differently maybe about Native American communities here in the U.S. So that's my question.
Okay. I would first say, I grew up in a very small town in Oklahoma, and I moved to a college town. But so when I was a kid, you thought of Oklahoma City, we just called it the city. I mean, it was like, it's the city, right? And it had everything, malls and bigger stores. But growing up in a small community, it's like you had everything. It felt like you could ride your bike, walk everywhere. We had a movie theater. We had several department stores. So I didn't feel like I was missing anything until I think I went to college, and then I tried to create my own identity. But traveling, I think, helped me. I took an opportunity when I was in college to work in a national park over the summer, and it allowed me to kind of shed all my own kind of self, the rigidity of who I was, you know, things I didn't like, things I hadn't tried, what that was cool, this person wasn't cool. And I was with people from all across the world working in a national park. It was like going to college without the homework or class, you know, so we worked, but then we would hang out and we would go to other national parks and we would go and do things. And I felt that, you know, these were people from all different types of faiths, classes, educational experiences. Some of them were working seasonally, so they didn't attend school, and it was really good. And it told me that there are so many good people out there, you know, and if you just give yourself a little bit, give a little bit of yourself, and have faith in people, that, you know, that can change you, and it did. I regret, though, is I didn't travel. I traveled to a lot of states, mostly in my car when I was in college, and since then I've been afforded a lot of privilege in being able to travel throughout the United States throughout my career. But until, you know, I was a full-fledged adult before I ever went abroad. And I think that, you know, and I've spent the subsequent years trying to catch up. You know, I love going abroad. I think being a global citizen is one of the best things we can teach people, young people, is going somewhere where you feel that you're not the center of the world. The way you do things, the way they do things there is not wrong or backwards. It's different, and it works. Whether it's languages, whether it's social practices, whether it's transportation. There is so much to learn outside of a classroom in addition to what you're doing. So I know that you have a very robust study abroad program here, and for students, I would take advantage of it and travel, because I know that those study tours I led, it changed a lot of my students' lives. These are students who had, some of them have been on a plane before, but only to maybe Dallas. Some of them had went to, you know, Florida for vacation or California, but a lot of them did not have passports, and they came back, and it wasn't just an instant change. It really helped drive their success and their I think what they thought of themselves and what they've thought of others improved, and so that was a really important kind of phase of my career that I thought that when I unlocked that about myself and my students, it's something I would not want to give up. It's the same as when I can see there's a pre-service teacher in my class, and I see them gain the confidence and form their own pedagogy. And then I see them at graduation, but then I hear from them a year or two later, or I see them out in, you know, when I'm having dinner somewhere, and they're just like, oh my God. You know, and I always think it's like, you know, oh, that was a couple years ago. And it's like, no, that was probably about 8. You know, it's like, it just goes by so quick. But those are things I think that are so rewarding for me. Yeah.
I do have a question in terms of, you know, just with book banning and everything that happens nowadays, and the difficulty in defending the text that we teach. My district will really defend us as long as we have the text approved, but I would not say the approval process is easy. You need to read the book ahead of time, you need to fill out a pretty lengthy process, and then you need to give a review board of teachers about a semester in order to go through it. So it's something that you really need to plan ahead. So what would you recommend? I know that personally in my district, I can't speak for middle school, but I don't think there's any native texts. In 10th grade advanced, there's There by Tommy Orange, and then in the 11th grade remedial class, there are a couple of different Sherman Alexie books, and I know that we've talked about, you know, whether or not to keep using Alexie. So what would you recommend aside from poetry? Because I think that, at least in my district, that's kind of getting nixed too, or putting on the optional side. What would you recommend for teachers to introduce these narratives in the class while still being protected? And I think my question is, do you think that if we offer just one of these books in one class that does enough? Or do we need to do more on top of that in order to help both non-Indigenous students and Indigenous students of multiple backgrounds really grapple with that identity?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, but, no, I have to clarify too that, you know, a majority of my students I teach are non-native, and I recognize that responsibility. Whether I call them captive audience classes that they're required to take my class for something, or if it's elective, and what I've found is you know, showing them grace and really respecting why they're in my class. Because I call them repeat offenders, right? Because they'll come and they'll take 3 or 4 of my classes. And so showing them that respect, but also expressing gratitude and really, in terms of the feedback, the guidance I provide to my students, it's important to me because I know they're not just going, some of them are not going to be teachers, they're going to be, you know, in finance. And they're going to work with people, whether they're native or non-native, you know, who want mortgages. They're going to work, you know, in the private sector. They're going to work in the public sector. So these types of experiences that we have in class, I think, helps lends to that. As for the text, a couple of recommendations would be, so some of these texts, right, I don't like to assign works that like my pre-service teachers, again, I don't, a majority of my students are now not pre-service teachers, but when that was, I avoided assigning things that they could not teach because it's like, wow, you know, it's like, this is a great story, but I have to leave it at the door. You know, I want them empowered to go into something that they could use or something by that author they could use. I want, so that's one thing, Kim. But in terms of recommendations, Louise Erdrich's Birch Bark Books. It's in the Twin Cities. Just go to it's a bookstore that she owns, and she promotes a lot of native literature, Birch Bark Books. They have a great menu, and so that is, I would say, very important in terms of like giving you a chance. So The Firekeeper's Daughter, it's a great text, but I wouldn't assign it because of the subject matter, right? I mean, I just wouldn't. But there's some stories that I wouldn't. There's that. Also, the American Library Association is a great, and then the American Indian Library Association. So that provides context, and also they have awards. Those are, and then if you're looking for, well, I mean, it's just poetry, but the Library of Congress, when Joy Harjo was poet laureate, there's an online catalog where you can have audio and text of several dozens of poems, but yeah, the best online resource for me is if I look at something and I want to see what age is it, what age group is this, I go to Birch Bark Books, and so it's classified by that. So yeah, and then anyone, if they want recommendations or they would just like to talk about it, I'm always available as well. So I would welcome an opportunity to continue this conversation with you, and I appreciate your support, and thank you.
Well, I want to thank you all for coming out this evening. Thanks to Tim especially for this thoughtful presentation. And Tim, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. You said you'd be here all week with us, and you've been going to classes and helping out in whatever way you can. So really appreciate that. You've become a good friend of Seton Hill after all these years. So it's great to have that relationship with you. And I have to say, I think in the 37 years that our center has been here, it's the first time we've had a presentation from a Native American scholar. So I think it was long overdue. So thank you. And that last question that we had actually was a good segue for me, because our closing session is tomorrow morning, and we'll be talking about the difficulty that teachers often face these days of teaching about the Holocaust and genocides in this polarized climate we're in. So we'll have a panel session right back here in Sicilian Hall. We'll begin at 11 a.m. So please join us for that. So thank you, everyone. Let's give you one more round of applause. Thank you, Tim.